I welcome you to this video. This is an image coming to you of Mark Edward Ochterman. It's the 18th of November in 2022 for me, and I just finished a series of videos examining the problem of dramatic reading. Maybe I shouldn't say the problem, but methods to be employed in getting dramatic reading for persons reading in church, reading scripture in church. And many of the techniques that I emphasize there have come from my study of secular literature as much as sacred literature. The two are really often somewhat difficult to distinguish one from the next, and maybe we shouldn't strive to make these categories too solid. But many of the techniques that are employed in biblical studies, or that I employ in biblical studies, derive from studies of folk literature, so often oral literature, or something that almost certainly has its roots in an oral telling of a story rather than a writing down of the story, because the kinds of techniques that are employed when things are spoken are often a little bit different than the techniques that are employed in writing. And that's a very considerable subject, both of debate and to explain the reasons for that. But one of the points that came up in the examination in the specific instance was the letter to the Hebrews, that in the 9th chapter, the 23rd through the 28th verse, that's what I was looking at. There are a number of repeated phrases or closely related phrases. And as I was reading it, I was reminded of some passages in the Silmarillion of Tolkien, specifically in the section called of Beren and Luthien, or Luthien. And I'm going to look at them and talk about some clever word use that moves the story along. To set up the clip, this is a passage in which Beren has fallen in love with Luthien. Beren is a human, that is to say, he's a man. Okay, so in Tolkien's language, the word human, I think, I'm not sure that it ever occurs in Tolkien's writing, the word human. But he does use the word men or man. So this is a community of people, and he does sometimes use the word people, or folk. But there is one group, one race, he also uses that term, who are subject to death. And there's another race, the elves, who are immortal. So Beren has fallen in love. Beren, the man, the immortal, has fallen in love with Luthien, the immortal elf. And not only is she an elf, but her mother is a Maya. And the Maya is glossed in this passage of Beren and Luthien as of divine race. So she is of some sort of heavenly, she's a heavenly being of some sort. And it gets to be complicated to explain. But the Maiar are immortal, but they are of a higher order than elves. Elves are strictly embodied beings, and the Maiar are may be embodied, but are not restricted to that. So we have three classes of beings: immortal and embodied being the middle one, immortal and free from the constraints of body if they wish to be at the higher level, and one that's embodied and is very strongly bound to the body at the bottom. So this is Beren, Luthien, and Melian, Luthien's mother. Luthien's father is Thingol. He is a king of the elves. And Beren, having fallen in love with Luthien, Luthien having fallen in love with Beren, they come before Luthien, or they come before Luthien's parents, Thingol and Melian, and present their case that they wish to marry. Thingol looked in silence upon Luthien, and he thought in his heart, unhappy men, children of little lords and brief kings, shall such as these lay hands on you and yet live? So the you here, in case you didn't get it, is Luthien. He's looking at Luthien, and he's saying, about Luthien, unhappy men, shall such as these lay hands on you and yet live. That's what he thinks to himself. He thought in his heart. I shouldn't point to my head, I should point. This is what he thinks to himself. Then breaking the silence, he said, Thingol said, I see the ring, son of Barahir. Okay, so what's the ring? Beren has held up a ring that belonged to his father, which had been given to his father by another elf king, a different king of the elves. But it indicates the connections of Beren's family to the high nobility of this higher order than he himself belongs to. So Thingol says, I see the ring, son of Barahir, and I perceive that you are proud and deem yourself mighty. But a father's deeds, even had his service been rendered to me, avail not to win the daughter of Thingol and Melian. Now, this is a significant point on a variety of levels. One is that Thingol, very rightly, perceives that Beren is proud and deems himself mighty. Somewhat different than certain other protagonists or major characters in Tolkien's stories, human characters or men. Beren, I think, is fairly honest. Like he comes to his pride honestly. He becomes a bit haughty to Thingol, but again, like I say, he comes to it honestly. There are certain other characters, again, and I won't go through that aspect of it, but he certainly, having said that I wouldn't go through it, I'd go through it. He's very substantially contrasted to Turin, the son of Húrin, who also presents himself to elf kings. And this is a very typical structure of Tolkien's writing. It's very common in The Lord of the Rings to have characters who are paralleled to each other. It's in fact a very important feature of Tolkien's didactic method, his method of presenting moral concerns. So in The Lord of the Rings, and I hope if you're looking at this that you have some familiarity with The Lord of the Rings, the characters Denethor and Theoden are kind of obvious parallels. Faramir and Aragorn, Faramir and Boromir. So single character can be parallel to several others. So you look at these pairs and you say, like, here's Boromir, and he's basically sort of unsuccessful, but in the end he redeems himself. Faramir is pretty much like just very consistent, very steady, but they are contrasted to each other in a variety of ways. Faramir is a kind of Aragorn light, or he's sort of the junior version, and even Sam, who is always kind of portrayed as being a little bit dim intellectually. I'm not sure that he's a great character, morally very strong, but his strength, and I think I'm being true to Tolkien's vision of him, comes in part because he's like he doesn't quite take in intellectually the situation, and therefore Faramir, who is pretty truthy in his assessments of people, says that that Sam should be silent because his master has more wit, which sounds like a diss, but I don't think that it's really intended to be a dismissal of Sam's moral qualities. He's very solid. There's no question of that. But his solidity derives in part from his not really fully grasping the full situation. So in a way, you can parallel Sam, who is a bit dim, but he's courageous, with Denethor, who has a lot of knowledge, more knowledge than he should have. He has secret knowledge that really is beyond his powers. And because it's beyond his powers, but he doesn't believe that himself, he believes that he's in full command of his rationality, and he's super intellectual, and he completely despairs because he thinks that he sees what the situation is. So, we have the contrast of the person who doesn't really know that much, but because he doesn't know that much, he has hope and he goes forward in spite of everything, and succeeds where other people don't. And the person who is fully rational, completely logical, just has bad information, or incomplete information, and doesn't it isn't he's kind of sophomoric at the he being Denethor. He's a wise fool, or a foolish wise person. Like he's got a lot of knowledge that he misapprehends, to his own loss and to the loss of his city and his nation. And you can make other. I mean, many parallels. I'm just giving a few examples. So, in the Silmarillion, in the stories that are told in the Silmarillion, you have such parallels. One of them is between Húrin Túrin rather, and Beren. And you can draw out all kinds of other things about it, but kind of the key features are a man associated with elves, kind of strange relationship with females, both of them, but different, because it's a parallel, but it's not. They're not the same person. They're a contrasting parallel, and one of them is successful despite terrible loss, and the other is not. But I digress. So, a father's deeds, even had his service been rendered to me, avail not to win the daughter of Thingol and Melian. And it's interesting because he doesn't say, avail not to win my daughter, avail not to win Luthien. He says, avail not to win the daughter of Thingol and Melian. And the reason why he says that is he's trying to emphasizing that his dignity, his pride, his might is that of, the first of the elves to see the light. He's the kind of the creme de la creme of the elves, and Beren just can't aspire to that. There's no way. Although there is, but from Thingol's perspective, and Melian isn't even from this world. She's from heaven. So how, when you put all of this together, how can Beren even be asking this? It's astonishing. But he has a way out. So he says, see now, I too desire a treasure that is withheld. Okay, so Luthien is withheld from Beren, but there's something that's withheld from Thingol. For rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth keep the jewel that I would possess against all the powers of the elf kingdoms. Now, I have to say that I owe a great deal in reading this to Christopher Tolkien's reading, which is on a Keedman LP recording. Now I'm sure, and there's a CD version of it. You could probably listen to it on YouTube. His reading on Beren and Luthien is exquisite. And he has marvelous sonority of his voice, but also the cadences that he uses. And it's, it's his father's writing, and so you have to give that a lot of credit. But he's picked it up. He's really taken it and he's really milking it. So in a passage like this, for rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth, keep the jewel that I would possess against all the powers of the elf kingdoms. It's prose, all right? But it's prose that's right on the edge of poetry. The cadence of this, when people talk about Tolkien and they say, oh, he's long-winded, and he describes things too much, it takes too long to say whatever it is that he's going to say. And I say, okay, but he also, even though some of the names, it's true that some of the names of his characters, Azanul Bizar, that's not a character, but that's a place. Okay. Some of them are a little elaborate, but his English is usually pretty basic. Even when he uses words like deem, which, not really used that much today. Mighty even is not particularly much used today. But rock and steel and fire, these are very basic. Everybody knows those words. Morgoth, of course, is a proper name, and so we excuse it. But I too desire a treasure that is withheld, for rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth. Keep the jewel that I would possess, and would possess. Part of what's happening here is that we're getting the sense, not because of the vocabulary, but the way that the vocabulary is ordered. So the way that the phrases are ordered gives you a sense of the sort of antiquity of Thingol, that he is just absolutely ancient, and he speaks in this kind of old-fashioned way. So, children of little lords and brief kings, shall such as these lay hand on you and yet live. Okay, so I would, yet I hear you say that bonds such as these do not daunt you. Go your way, therefore. Bring to me in your hand a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. And then, if she will, Luthien may set her hand in yours. Then you shall have my jewel. And though the fate of Ardida lie within the Silmarils, yet you shall hold me generous. Okay, so this is weird. Within the structure of the story, even, this is a little strange, because Thingol is demanding of Beren that Beren should bring him a jewel from the Iron Crown. There are 3 jewels that are in the Iron Crown. Now, these jewels were made by an elf who is called Feanor, who is gone, evaporated, so to speak. I guess you could say dead, but of elves, I'm not sure that that's quite the right thing to say, but he is no longer in the world. His sons, however, are. And his sons have a claim to this jewel. And they have also laid a curse on the jewels, which are no longer in their possession, that anyone who finds them and keeps them will win their complete enmity. They will do whatever is in their power to get the jewel back to themselves and do damage to anyone who tries to get in their way. So Thingol is basically calling upon, and Thingol is not one of the sons of Feanor. He's unrelated. So Thingol is asking for Beren to go and retrieve this thing from Morgoth's crown, and you don't really need to know anything more than that. But Morgoth is also not one of the sons of Feanor. He's a more powerful heavenly being than Melian, who has stolen these jewels from Feanor. So Thingol says, "Go your way, therefore." What is your way? Well, if you want to marry my daughter, go and do this, what I'm about to say. Bring me a jewel, one of these stolen jewels. Bring me just one. You don't have to bring me all 3. Just bring me one, and you may marry my daughter. And this is basically an impossible task, or what would seem to be an impossible task. And it's also one to which he has, in essence, no right to demand. It's if you think about it, okay, what he's saying is, okay, let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that Beren goes off, Luthien stays at home, Beren goes off, he grabs one of these jewels, somehow gets it, comes back, there, have a jewel. Okay, so now Thingol has the jewel. Well, everybody's going to know that he's got it, because they're special, they're magical jewels. I mean, magical. So he couldn't hide it from the sons of Feanor, and they would all come after him. They would come after Beren, but they'd come after him. And he's just banking on the fact that if Beren somehow got the jewel, that the sons of Feanor would do him in. It's just basically like, go and fly to the moon, on your own. Just flap your arms and go to the moon. I mean, it's like a ridiculous thing that he's asking. And now I'm getting to the word that I wanted to talk about. Thus he wrought the doom of Doriath and was ensnared within the curse of Mandos. And those that heard these words perceived that Thingol would save his oath and yet send Beren to his death. For they knew that not all the power of the Njaldor before the siege was broken, had availed even to see from afar the shining Silmarils of Feanor. For they were set in the Iron Crown and treasured in Angband above all wealth, and balrogs were about them. And countless swords and strong bars and unassailable walls and the dark majesty of Morgoth. And here again, we've got like the for rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth keep the jewel that I would possess against all the powers of the elf kingdoms. And here again, for they were set in the Iron Crown and treasured in Angband above all wealth, and balrogs were about them, and countless swords and strong bars and unassailable walls, and the dark majesty of Morgoth. It's that strongly cadenced prose that Tolkien does not employ it all the time. If he did, you'd soon get tired of the passages where he uses it. Where he does use it, it is an indicator that this is a moment of high emotion, of high import. Some of the key passages in the Lord of the Rings, and also in the Hobbit, but particularly in the Lord of the Rings, when Theoden leads the charge of the Rohirrim into the Pelennor fields, and Tolkien himself read this passage. That is, JRR Tolkien read that passage, and it's tremendously effective. It's tremendously affective because it employs both a strong cadence, but also a great deal of alliteration, which was something that, again, in Tolkien is a very strong indicator of affect, of emotion. Okay, so the word that I wanted to get at is ensnared. It's a sort of an odd word. It's not one that we use very much, and we don't use the word, the root of it much either, which is snare, possibly because people don't use snares that much in our common society. But I think it's not so remote a term that we don't know roughly what it means. So it's a trap. It's a kind of a trap. It's a trap that involves a string or a rope that catches on some part of the body, and then you can't escape from it. So to be ensnared is to be caught and sort of dangling, or like to be in a trap. So we're told here that Thingol wrought the doom of Doriath, which is his kingdom. He wrought the doom of his kingdom and was ensnared within the curse of Mandos. And we don't need to know precisely the details of what the curse of Mandos is, but that he's caught up in a curse, is kind of the chief thing. So, Beren laughed when he heard all this. He said, "For little price do elven kings sell their daughters for gems and things made by craft." and here is very much devaluing this particular thing, which is the Silmaril, that just is the driver of the whole narrative, really. But he's saying, but for little price, for gems and things made by craft. But if this be your will, Thingol, I will perform it. And when we meet again, my hand shall hold a Silmaril from the Iron Crown, for you have not looked the last upon Beren, son of Barahir. Spoiler alert, this is true. The next time Beren meets Thingol, his hand does hold a Silmaril from the Iron Crown. But, spoiler alert, his hand isn't on the end of his arm anymore. So there's a rashness in what Beren is saying. It's bravado, but it's also truth-telling. You know, he's an honest person. He's a truthful person, and he's also somewhat foresighted. This is a characteristic of his family. And so then he looked in the eyes of Melian, who spoke not. And that's interesting because he looks in the eyes of this divine being. He bade farewell to Luthien, to Nuviel, and bowing before Thingol and Melian, he put aside the guards about him and departed from Menegroth alone. Then at last Melian spoke, and she said to Thingol, O king, you have devised cunning counsel. But if my eyes have not lost their sight, it is ill for you whether Beren fail in his errand or achieve it, for you have doomed either your daughter or yourself. And now is Doriath drawn within the fate of a mightier realm. So, this is interesting in a variety of ways, and this is again very typical of Tolkien, that there's linkage forward and there's linkage backward. So, Beren looked in the eyes of Melian, and then in the next paragraph, Melian says, if my eyes have not lost their sight. So this idea of sight, okay, which is clearly not just about light and visualization, you know, in a simple factual way, but this is about clear thought, clear understanding. She and Beren have shared this moment. She sees him, not just as a physical form, but she sees his essence, his nature, and she knows that he is going to do this or die. And she also knows her daughter, and she knows that her daughter, having decided that this is her man, is not going to give it up. She's going to act in some way, and it is going to either destroy her or She's going to achieve the aim in some way that's going to cause the collapse of the kingdom. This, and maybe even both. And Thingol really reveals his character in the next, in his next line. So Melian says, "And now is Doriath drawn within the fate of a mighty realm." But Thingol answered, "I sell not to elves or men those whom I love and cherish above all treasure. And if there were hope or fear that Beren should come ever back alive to Menegroth," which is where this conference is taking place, "if there were hope or fear that Beren should come ever back alive to Menegroth, he should not have looked again upon the light of heaven, though I had sworn it." And this is, archaic, kind of an archaic expression. But what is interesting here, and again, back and forth, moving back to what Beren said, "For little price do elven kings sell their daughters for gems and things made by craft." And Thingol says, "I sell not to elves or men those whom I love and cherish above all treasure." This is one of those moments where, you kind of say, okay, now break up into groups of 4 or 5, and now we're going to discuss what is the moral significance of Beren's response and Thingol's response. But I'll leave that for somebody who teaches a class of Beren and Luthien. Now, just a few pages later, Beren, having left the realm of Doriath, which is Thingol's kingdom, goes to the nearby realm of Nargothrond, which is ruled by King Felagund, another elf kingdom. And Felagund is the one who gave the ring to Beren's father, which Beren presented to Thingol, which was the "I see the ring, son of Barahir." Okay. So Beren goes and he meets with Felagund, who is a friend of his, or a friend of his father anyway. And Felagund agrees that he will help Beren in his mission. And there's more complexity to this, but I see that I'm already getting close to 45 minutes. So, but when Felagund has made this agreement with Beren, he realizes that there's a basic problem, which is that he has living in his community 2 of the sons of Fëanor. These are the ones who have sworn an oath that they will stop anybody from possessing one of the Silmarils that their father had made. So Finrod says, Celegorm and Curufin, these are the two of the sons of Fëanor, are dwelling in my halls, and though I, Finarfin's son, am king, they have won a strong power in the realm and lead many of their own people. They have shown friendship to me in every need, but I fear that they will show neither love nor mercy to you if your quest be told. So don't tell anybody what we're doing, looking for this Silmaril, because if you do, it'll all be up. Like you couldn't get that for yourself. Yet my own oath holds, and thus we are all ensnared. Now, that's the word that I wanted to get at. This is the word that, I'm saying this whole thing is kind of building to this use of the word ensnared. It occurs twice. It's not, like I said, it's not really, unless you're writing about some kind of trappers or something, it's not a word that is going to come up that much. But in this particular edition, it occurs on page 202, and then it occurs again on page 205. And I believe that you could go through all the rest of this book and you would not find that word again. It occurs, to the best of my knowledge, only on page 202 and 205 in this edition. In the whole of the Silmarillion, that word, kind of heavily used edition of the Silmarillion. Okay. Now, there are certain words that Tolkien uses, and he uses them only once. Here's an example: Thrawn. Thrawn is used only once in the whole of the Lord of the Rings. In fact, the only time that I've ever seen it used in the English language is in the dictionary and in the Lord of the Rings. Only to describe some trees along the Great River. I think it's in the chapter, The Great River. It might be in the Breaking of the Fellowship. But it's at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. It's a cool word. It's not one that you'd really want to use that much, but it certainly conveys, a certain gnarly kind of situation, and it's pretty evident from its context what it means. But here again, ensnared. It's a potent word because it's not used that much. But it's significant that we're being told that Thingol ensnares his realm, and then Felgund expands this idea to say we are all ensnared. Thus, we are all ensnared. So, and between these two uses of the word ensnared, Melian says, "O king, you have devised clever counsel, and now Doriath is drawn into the fate of a mightier realm." And I'm not quite sure what she means, whether it refers to Beleriand, to Middle Earth, to Arda, increasingly greater levels. But clearly, now we're in the big picture. This is not just a local issue. This is big now, and that's the sense of these three aspects of this really fairly short. It's maybe 12 or 14 paragraphs, but what you're seeing here is Beren's issue with Luthien, because she is who she is, as Thingol points out, the daughter of Thingol and Melian, she's significant. I'm sorry, that was bad motion. She's a significant character because of her parentage, if nothing else. And Beren is significant, but he's not significant like that. In terms of this world, the construction of this world is such that, he's, like I said, kind of at this low level. Thingol's at the middle level, Melian's at the high level, and Melian and Thingol's daughter is actually elevated in her status because of who she is above Thingol. Like she's a greater being than he is. So his request of Beren, or demand of Beren, that Beren should get the Silmaril, is pulling these significant characters who have thus far stayed aloof from most of the activity surrounding and warfare. Everybody's trying to get the Silmaril. It's this. Maybe I shouldn't say everybody, but there's a lot of action going on to acquire the Silmarils, or to get the Silmarils back, and it's sort of the main driver of the story, which is justly called the Silmarillion. But the ensnarement, the being drawn into the wider realm, thus we are all ensnared. It's an amplification from, their realm is ensnared. Okay, so it's caught up in something, and then into a wider realm, and then we're all ensnared. Tolkien brooded on these things. He really, really put a lot of thought and effort, and surely a great deal of meditation between drafts. I think brooded is probably a really good word for this. And when you see the tight construction of this language, the extreme discipline of having the just right word in just the right place. It really is inspiring if you're a writer. It makes you say, gosh, I want to be able to do that with my own thing. And if you're a reader, it's got to be like, thank you. This is so wonderful, the way that the words can open up this whole imaginary process so fully. It really is a wonderful thing to be able to read. And thus, we are all ensnared.